views expressed by our guests are their own and do not reflect the official stance of their employer or any affiliated organizations.
Welcome back to the Council's Podcast. I'm your co-host, Daniel Abramoff. We have another great interview with the Chief Legal Officer at Casey's, Katrina Lindsey. We sat down to speak with Katrina about the different objectives that she's accomplished throughout her career and how she got to where she's at, as well as from the very beginnings and what got her interested in law. I hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, no, thank you for the invite, Dan. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So just jumping right into it, I'd love for you to share your journey, how you became chief legal officer, and what were some pivotal moments that shaped your path.
So I'll kind of go back. The young me shouldn't be sitting here. The young me thought that I'd have a very different path in this world. I graduated from high school. Ended up going to community college because didn't quite have the money that I needed to go to the college I wanted to go to, and went to community college for a year. And while I was there, worked as a bartender and a corporate trainer for Chili's. And after 1 year of community college, told my mother, I think I'm good. And I think a good background is my mom actually has two bachelor's degrees, one in marketing and one in management. And so, very passionate about education, very passionate about completing degrees. And, when I went and told her I'm good, I'm sure she was shaking a little bit. And she told me, just promise me someday you'll go back. And I told her, yeah, like, of course, any 19-year-old tells their parents, sure, I gotcha, I'll go back. And went and spent 2 years with one of my friends from high school, like literally living our best lives. And then she decided to get married. And so I looked around my restaurant and determined that I was probably one of the older servers in that restaurant, and that the next step was either go back to school or do something different. And so, decided to go to Florida State, um, pursue a degree in communication. Thought I was gonna work for an ad agency, didn't think I would, do anything further, in my education other than that bachelor's degree, and went and interviewed with a ad agency, got a job. This was like 1995-ish, and, the job I was going to get paid less than I was making working 4 days a week as a server, and it was salaried, exempt, which meant 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no overtime, and I was contemplating taking the job, and I went to go talk to a professor, and that professor was like, "Have you considered going to law school?" And I was like, "You're lucky I'm here." Like, "I'm good. I got enough. I'm good." And literally this professor on a almost weekly basis was like, "Have you applied yet? Here's a scholarship. Have you applied to law school?" And was on me until I finally applied for a scholarship that he gave me. I got the scholarship. I hadn't applied to law school yet. And so I had to go back and take my LSAT. I had to go back and apply to law school. Um, but I will tell you, if it wasn't for him pushing, I don't know that I'd be sitting in this seat today.
The fact that you now had a real immediate reason to get that, to go and pass that, I'm sure that did that play into it a little bit as well to almost push you even harder to pass it because you have the scholarship waiting for you.
I had money waiting, and it would have been such a shame to not have been able to utilize the money that was being able or that was going to be given to me.
Right now, you're practicing everything, right? You're overseeing the ship on every piece of action that's going on. Early on, how did that look for you, and what were some of the practices that sort of immediately perked your interest?
The law firm that I ended up, practicing at, when I first started, was Lounge, Drosdick, Doster, Cantor, and Reed in Orlando. And the beauty of Lowndes was that in the very beginning, they had a rotation for all associates. So if you were an associate that started there, you could move around to the different practice areas of the firm. And I started in what would probably be called kind of a hodgepodge. So it was, a little bit of labor and employment, a little bit of um, trust and wills, a little bit of healthcare and sports law. And what was really good is that the firm gave everyone an opportunity to kind of learn a little bit of everything. I spent a year doing real estate. And what I learned along the way going into different practice areas is what I really enjoyed. Um, I learned in law school. I enjoyed litigation. I enjoyed doing moot court and mock trial and all those things. Um, Nothing changed when I got to the firm. And so when I was at Lowndes, what was really interesting is that rotation was also built on firm need. And so if the firm needed real estate attorneys, I was going to be a real estate attorney. If the firm needed litigators, I was going to be a litigator. And eventually I decided that I'm probably not the best real estate attorney. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not great at it. And so I ended up leaving and going to a different firm. The firm I went to was Carlton Fields. I practiced law there for about 4.5 years. Thoroughly enjoyed doing nothing but litigation, all sorts of litigation. Um, and I think what it taught me is that, and I think is the beauty of litigation, you're always a learner. When you are litigating, you have to really understand the subject matter of what you're litigating. And it's such a skill that has really played into what I do today. Um, the beauty of litigation is that I have to learn about a company. I have to learn what they do. I have to learn how they do it. And when you're inside a company in house, you got to learn what every business unit does. You've got to understand what the pinch points are. And so that early experience in doing litigation and really having to be um, a learner all the time and learning different things has really paid dividends in house.
And so that was really actually going to be my next question. Going from the law firm side, it sounds like all of those skills really matched up perfectly. And is that how it felt going in, or was there sort of a climb up? I mean, obviously, you have to get to know your company, you have to get to know exactly what you're going to be doing there. But being able to work on such a diverse background at many different types of cases, I feel like would almost put you at a huge advantage.
It does and it doesn't. It's interesting because you think, "Hey, I've worked on cases, I learned stuff, it's not a big deal." It's one thing to learn for a particular case and learn a very finite amount of information that really drives the case. It's another thing to have to really understand a company and understand its history and understand its decision making and, how you got to a particular place. And I used to call it, you go into a company, you do an archaeological dig. So you try to figure out where all the bones are, where, and put everything together and how we got to where we are. And I think the hard part is it takes time. It takes building relationships. It takes a lot of listening. And I think, what's funny too is at a law firm, you get asked finite questions. So, research X or research Y. Companies ask practical questions. Um, and the great example is my first in-house job was with Walt Disney World, which is truly a fantastic place to start if you ever go in-house. I mean, working for a theme park is amazing because they do everything, and it's like it's a little town. Um, my first week, I get a call and it's from the security team. And the security team asks, "Hey, we've got this dog in a car. Can we break into the car to get the dog out?" And I'm like, "Why are they calling the lawyer about this? Like, I don't understand." And so I go to my colleague and he goes, "Oh yeah, there's an order from the chief judge that allows us to, be SPCA and basically, you know, allows us to get the dog out of the car." And I'm like, "One, how do you know that? And two, why do we know that?" And what it brought to me was the fact that my job is much more practical now. My job is more solution based and helping people achieve their goal rather than defending a case and dealing with facts after the fact.
Right, which is so interesting and touching on the fact that you have Disneyland is a Disney World or Disneyland? Disney World is such a good example of, to your point, a very as like its own town, right? So all types of things that come up in real time. Um, so I think that's a great point. At the firm, you're running around catching many different balls and releasing them too. At your company, you are catching the balls and holding on to them. To me, that sounds exactly right? And an organization that you need to really dig into and understand not only what happened in the past, but what will happen.
One of the big things too is that, I always tell folks that I hire that come from a firm and come in-house that, the beauty of a firm is you do the work, you get paid by the hour. Once you've completed the work, you get paid. And whether the client takes the advice or not, you get paid. In-house, your job is to make sure or to figure out how to have the client take the advice because it's your paycheck too. Because when the company, does the right thing and does it the right way, it benefits everyone. And so it's a much harder job because you have to be persuasive in a very different way than you do at a law firm.
Which is interesting because at a law firm, you'd think that a lot of more of a business oriented mindset is flowing through, but that probably is only the case with the senior leadership. Whereas it sounds like in house, no matter what role you are, what you're deciding not only has a lot to do with the future of the company, but it also has to do with the business and how will the business be able to work together with you to avoid any type of potential issues. And so, that brings me to my next question about leading teams, right? And I'd love to learn a little bit about your approach to team building and leadership, and specifically just growing a team and building that fostering collaboration.
So I'll go back and kind of tell you a little bit about how I actually got into leadership. I was at the time working at Walt Disney World, saw a position with Darden Restaurants as the vice president of employment and litigation, and thought, I've spent almost 6 years doing employment and litigation. Clearly, it feels like a good fit. Um, Talked to the recruiter who is fantastic. And I submitted my resume to her, and she's like, so tell me about your leadership. And I was like, I've led my assistant. And she was like, oh, okay. And she's like, I'll submit your resume, but they're really looking for somebody that has leadership. And so I was like, okay. The general counsel comes back and says, love your resume. Really looking for some leadership here, but we have another position. And at the time, I'm fairly young in my career. I'm like, I'm good. I work for Walt Disney World. I'm not making a lateral. And she goes, no, no, no. The position we're thinking about you for is actually a senior director in charge of commercial litigation for the company. And you can grow your team and build your team. And I was like, oh, okay. Um, I was also drawn, a company car came with it. So I was a little jaded that was like, who doesn't want a company car? Um, but no, it was my opportunity to get in somewhere and to build and to figure out what I needed and how I needed to support the business. And I think one of the most important pieces of it is it was kind of my journey from being strictly the lawyer to being a leader and understanding how to deploy resources and how to think about what I need to do to support the company. So, started out with me, a temporary assistant that I shared with my buddy Bruce, who was the transactional attorney, and a fairly new paralegal. That team went from that small to about 18 people when I left. So over time, I grew the team to add an attorney, add another paralegal, add another specialist, and then based on the work that we were bringing in. So we built programs. We built a recovery program that still exists today that's brought in millions and millions of dollars. And just thinking about how the company evolved helped me think about kind of what we needed. I will tell you the biggest piece of my leadership journey, the biggest influence I had was actually an attorney who came in at that vice president position. So that attorney comes in, and we literally graduated from law school the same year, same amount of legal experience. She had just been in house a lot longer. And when I tell you, she shared everything that she could with me, and not just, verbally, but her actions. So one of the things I still use to this day that she gave me is when I walk in, I walk through my department and I say good morning to everyone. It literally takes me a half an hour to get in to sit in my seat. But the beauty is, she was like, I meet people in their space. I don't force people to come to mine. And the beauty of it is that you find out if somebody's having a good day or if somebody needs help or if somebody, really has a lot going on and this is probably a day that they probably should go home and work on either whatever they're working on at home or focus on other things. Um, the other thing is that time also builds an avenue for people to ask you questions, that they wouldn't feel comfortable walking down the hall to the general counsel's office, but because you're sitting there and because you're in their space, they feel a little bit more comfortable.
And that to me says a great leader when it comes to being able to keep everything updated, refreshed, and to your point, making sure that people have someone to speak to without feeling that they're going to, be reprimanded or anything will come out of that. And I think that's a fantastic uh, idea. And for those leaders who don't do that, I could see such value coming from doing that. Because while that's 30 minutes, 20, 30 minutes, it's you making sure that everyone feels like they can pretty much tell you anything. And then that's really how you get ahead of things. That's how you can advance. So I think that's excellent.
Well, and the beauty was, she used to say, every conversation is an investment. So every conversation is an investment in the company, is an investment in, each individual team member that's a part of your team. And so um, I always used to giggle. There was a time when I was in charge of the larger team, and I walk into an office, and like half the team is sitting in this office just talking, and they all like clam up the second I walk in. And I just walk in, I'm dropping something down on the desk, and I'm walking out, and they're like, "You're not gonna make us break up?" And I'm like, "This 15 minutes or 20 or whatever time you're spending talking to each other, building, camaraderie, building relationships is gonna pay me dividends later. So, you all love on each other, giggle with each other. When times are gonna be super tough, I can guarantee you'll have each other's back. And so, not worry."
You're so smart about that because that is exactly right. People, and it's so obvious to everyone, but no one really thinks about it when you're getting down to work, how important it is to build that personal relationship with your colleagues, to avoid so many pitfalls, to be able to also have somebody to speak to support you. So I think that is another excellent point of a good leader, which is somebody who understands when things are on fire, you got to get running. But for the most part, when people are together, um, transferring ideas and getting to know each other, that you can't really put a price on that.
And the beauty of it too is that, you know, everyone has to feel comfortable sharing their ideas and sharing their thoughts. Everyone has to bring their best to the table in order to get the best out. And what I find is that, especially in the legal department, man, so many issues can be resolved if you get all the brains at the table. If it's just, me and I'm the only one that's thinking about it, no one else brings their whole, self or brings all of their ideas. I may get a solution, I may not get the best solution.
Right. You want everyone who's there for the brain power they're bringing to the table. You want them to be comfortable with speaking up, to give all types of fantastic ideas. When it comes to your work within your past history in dealing with litigation, and I'm curious to know how's that other areas like that. and employment law. Has that shaped your opinion on managing diverse teams?
It has. I think what I realized is that, diversity plays all sorts of roles. So, the traditional is, it's diversity in how you look. But really, it's in where you come from, what ideas you bring to the table, what's your educational background, what's your experience. And, a great example is I worked with this phenomenal attorney when I was at Darden and hired him as a temp. So he came in to kind of help me clean up a little bit of a mess. And the thought was going to be, yeah, he'll be here for a year, maybe, but he'll help me get this program off the ground. His background was he was a plaintiff's attorney. And so he's in house doing insurance defense, basically. And we kind of clashed a couple of times. And the beauty of it is that he taught me so much more about how to handle matters and how to think about matters because he came from a different vantage point. Um, and I think that is the beauty of kind of having a diverse team, not just, having a team that all came from, we're going to make it up, the restaurant industry or the C-store industry. Having teams that came from different backgrounds that can bring different pieces in. I also feel like different practice areas. Don't get me wrong, I love a litigator, but not all CLOs have to be corporate secretaries. Not all CLOs have to be M&A attorneys. I think there is a beautiful blend of having different areas of law be at the top. Um, doesn't necessarily mean that any are, prohibited, but um, I would say here, I'm like, sometimes the beauty of having a litigator is that you look from a risk lens and, you look from a risk mitigation lens and not necessarily a very black or white lens.
Exactly, and you look at all these areas of litigation, and while they could all be incredibly different and almost, polar opposites, they're still very similar in the sense of the risk factor, to your point, and how you oversee, overview, and execute on these matters. So having somebody with different industries, different backgrounds like that, I think that that's excellent. That's a great point. And I think while it might feel like a little bit of a risk for a leader to bring someone in with a different background, I think it would be helpful for them to consider what you're saying, which is you're going to get a lot of benefits, but you need to be able to yield that and find that within them, and appreciate that difference.
I think, it's kind of like a team of rivals. You think about folks that have very different vantage points, but that can educate each other and, influence ideas in a way that I think if everyone comes from the same background, same industry, um, there's a lot of, bias that's already built into it that makes it sometimes hard to embrace, different, unique, probably groundbreaking ideas when you just haven't seen it work before.
Right. I guess due to the potential of boxing yourself in.
Yeah. But I'll tell you this, one of the other more important things too when you're dealing with teams is really, for me, setting expectations. Because I think the hard part is when you get all those different personalities in, especially, I would say lawyers, very strong personalities with very strong opinions. You got to set what the expectation is for what you're talking about. And one of the things that I love is I give this speech all the time. I learned a while back, which is um, view, voice, vote, veto. So you let your team know what you expect of them. Do I want your point of view? Do I want to hear your voice, which is your persuasive voice? Do you have to vote on this? Are you going to get a chance to weigh in on this decision? Or do you have a veto? So if the decision is made, you can always pull it back. And I would say the best part about that is when you set expectations, people live up to them. When you don't set expectations, there's confusion. And so, as long as in the very beginning you kind of tell folks, hey, we're going to talk about this. I'm not looking for your vote. I'm looking for your voice. Hey, we're going to talk about this. You guys may vote on it. I'm the veto, just so you know. But I think that also helps your team kind of understand where they fit in and also empowers them to understand, well, this is where my voice is important. I'm going to push it out there.
That is so interesting to think about because obviously your role is to create those guidelines, to create those guardrails, to make sure that while everyone is going straight forward as fast as they can, they're not falling right off the road. It sounds like you really put that in such a perfect way. Was that a method you created, or was this something you learned?
I actually stole it from someone.
Perfect. Well, the greatest, the greatest art of all time was stolen by other artists. So, that makes perfect sense. But I think that that is so excellent. And again, it gives, especially coming from, yeah, I'm in sales, right? So our whole world is you've got to get to this point, you've got to do this. And while for some folks it could be a challenge, I find that that is exactly what people should have if they're given the right opportunity. Here's what we want from you. Here's why we brought you here. And to your point, you're left without any of that. You're really just feeling around in the dark.
Well, and you feel like your voice isn't heard if you don't understand kind of what the expectation is. Um, Sometimes people will think that they have a vote in something, and if it turns out they don't, you may lose a team member because they feel like you don't care about my voice, you don't care about me, you didn't listen when I, held my hand up and voted for something. And the worst thing that happens is you can have part of your team that doesn't feel like they're part of the team.
I'd like to get your thoughts on what advice you would give to women in law who aspire to leadership positions, especially those coming from non-traditional backgrounds.
I would say this, say yes. Say yes to anything that comes up. I think one of the things that helped me along the way is raising my hand. Um, I'll give you a great example. I made a lateral move over to a different company. I worked for Office Depot for a while, or the ODP Corporation, and my CLO there was phenomenal. Actually, I had two; both were phenomenal. But what was really interesting, is that I was interested in getting board presence and being in front of a board. And as a litigator, most times the only time you're in front of a board is because something really bad has happened and you're explaining the really bad thing. And so it's never kind of the experience that you would want as a counselor, which is you're in there, you're listening, you're providing some advice. Um, my CLO, I said, "I'm interested in risk factors." And he was like, "Never has an attorney ever said, 'I wanna work on risk factors.'" And he goes, "But if you want to, have at it. Enjoy, kid." And, let me literally explore the things that I was interested in and take time to learn new things, even at a senior level. Um I also got to lead cross-functional teams when it came to either, cross-cutting or, kind of figuring out new strategies for the company. And the beauty to me is, especially as a woman, is taking a chance and being someplace where you are wholly uncomfortable, where you're sitting in a room and everyone else may know more than you, but there is a reason why you're sitting in the room. And you're sitting in the room not only to learn, but to add a different point of view. And so, to me, say yes. Say yes.
Most people would not think about that being your answer. Even though everyone deep down knows it's true, right? The greatest things come from, unfortunately, usually the most difficult times. And to be able to put yourself in the view of something that you might not know yet how to deal with, but you have the confidence that you could deal with it. I think that really does separate leaders from those who might not be up for that. But I do think that a lot of attorneys out there hearing advice like this will allow them to remember this and to think, you know what? That's Katrina had mentioned this. I could do this. I might not know how to do it immediately, but I'm going to figure this out.
The fun part for anyone, especially when you are thinking about what your career looks like, is to be open. Again, I'll say I've never dreamed that I would be in this position, but along the way, I saw someone in the position that I wanted to be in. And the beauty too is I wasn't afraid to tell that person. hey, I'm really interested in what you do. Um, what I found is that to a person, if you tell someone, hey, I'm interested in what you do, I'm interested in your job, I have not met a person now that would turn you down to talk about it. Everyone who is in a position, if someone else goes, hey, just want to understand your journey, people are absolutely willing to share. And I found that through those conversations, I've learned so much more about the jobs that I've wanted to do and frankly, the ability to do them. I think if you had told Katrina at a law firm that she could be a chief legal officer, I don't think she would have understood what that meant and what that looked like. But along the way, I met the person that was in the next job. And so because of that, it made this job real eventually.
People often think, I would love to ask this person, how do I get there? But I don't want to come off as like somebody who just doesn't know anything or somebody. But if anything, it does the opposite because it shows, because how often does somebody do that? Right. It shows that in that person, there's a good chance that they believe they could do it. They just need to figure it out. And so, I mean, I can imagine myself or friends or anyone who came to us and said, "Hey, how do you do what you do? I would love to do that." I would 100% want to tell them because it's really not meant for everyone. But for those that really like feel comfortable enough to even ask, I think that is certainly the first step you got to take.
Having touched or been around the thing that you want to be really kind of almost makes it real to you. I always say when you're in the room that is the next room and you see behind the curtain, it normalizes what's behind the curtain to you.
Especially if you can have a conversation with that person behind the curtain and say, "Hey, what do I need to do here to get to where you're at? And what is your story?" Right. Yeah, exactly. I have one last question for you, and to me, it is certainly up there as all these questions I think are very important, and your thoughts on these have been wonderful. Um, looking back, what would be a piece of guidance or advice that you would offer to young attorneys or students who are still figuring out what they're doing?
Be a constant learner. Don't take for granted that learning comes in all shapes and forms and sizes, and that just because you're doing one area of law now doesn't mean that this is the end of your career or this is where you'll be 20 years from now. Um, I always tell people, I'm like, there are different seasons of your life. And over those seasons, you will find things that interest you, that invigorate you. Don't limit. Don't limit yourself. And don't think that because I've done X for this many of years, I can never do Y. Um, I spent some time in the business, learned a lot, um, and respect my business peers because there is stuff that they do that is so much more difficult than what I do. But I don't think that I would have understood that but for taking a chance and learning. And so if you're early in your legal career, know that what you're doing today or maybe next year may not be what you're doing 20 years from now. And so be open, be open to the possibilities.
I love that, and maybe I can add one in if you'd allow me. Find a good mentor, which is not easy to do, but if you can find someone like yourself, Katrina, who your doors are open, you take great interest in the growth of these folks, and especially even somebody who might not work with you, but still has that glimmer in their eye. I think is so valuable. So I think the advice that you offered today is so excellent. I just want to thank you so much for joining us, and I know that this episode will live a very, very long time, offer a lot of value to a lot of attorneys who really could use it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for asking me to join and thanks for the wonderful conversation.